Michael Kaskey-Blomain covering the game for 97.3 ESPN.com. Right now, he's got the trade deadline buyout targets for the Sixers. We'll talk some Sixers, Raptors, and some of the targets with him. Right now, the Boardwalk Honda Hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. MKB, what's up, my man?
What's up, Mike? How you feeling?
Feeling all right. I'm feeling all right. We're getting close to the trade deadline Thursday. You got a little primer up on the website, 97.3ESPN.com. Let's first talk about the game tonight, though, and just kind of get your take coming off that 4-game road swing out west. And, you know, you had the big win in Golden State, and you had kind of a, somewhat disappointing loss against the Kings that people will overblow because you beat Warriors one night, you lose the Kings the next night, so people kind of, judge you from night to night. But where do you put this game with Toronto coming to Philadelphia?
Normally you would say that it's, obviously a pretty big test for the Sixers, a big matchup for the state of the Eastern Conference. Obviously, two teams that are looking to, really get out of the East and get to the finals. But it comes at such a strange time. I don't know how much stock I'm putting into it, meaning that, like you said, the trade deadline's coming up in 2 days. And not that I think the Sixers are, nothing necessarily crazy is going to happen, but I think there's a good chance the team looks, at least somewhat different in 3 days than it does right now. And, the moves that they make at the deadline or leading up to the buyout deadline on March 1st could, really kind of reshape the depth and the bench of the team that would go a long way toward helping them in the postseason. So this game against the Raptors will be kind of a test of, the Sixers as currently constructed, which I think we all already kind of realized they're, probably a reliable rotation piece or two short from, being a legit contender to come out of the East. So I think it'll be a good test, but at the same time, in a month, I think it'll be more interesting to see how the Sixers are playing than necessarily how they are tonight.
Yeah, how do you, when you look at these two teams right now, how do they compare? If they both were as constructed today moving forward here, how do the Sixers stack up with Toronto?
I think most people would agree that the Raptors would beat the Sixers in a 7-game series, but I do think it would be closer than a lot of people might expect, mainly because the cliche that rosters rotation shrink come the playoff time, which is true. And the Sixers starting five, starting if you want to extend it to 6 men, I would put up against anybody in the East when you're talking about obviously Joel, Ben, Jimmy, JJ, Wilson when he's healthy. The rest of these guys, the starting five is as good as anyone, and you're going to be relying on these guys a lot more in the playoffs, to log heavy minutes and to do things than you do necessarily in the regular season. But specifically a team like the Raptors, they've been able to have so much success this season because of their depth, and they just have a piece or two more that Nick Nurse can really rely on than comfortably than I think Brett feels comfortable with. So to me, the main difference right now between these two teams, it really just comes down to depth. I would take the Sixers starting five, equally or if not over the Raptors starting five. It just comes down to that 7th, 8th, 9th spot.
MKB, what's up, man? How you been?
What's up, E? How you doing?
It's Ryan. It's okay, though. It's a compliment.
Oh, what's up, Ryan?
What's up, MKB?
What up, man?
You got people's voices coming all over.
Yeah, we're coming from all angles here.
I was waiting, man. Ryan was jumping in.
Yeah, so listen.
What's up, both of you guys? What's going on?
So, Wall, breaking news, he's done. Does that make Washington sellers now? I mean, Bradley Beal's name's been thrown around a lot. Is that a realistic target for this team?
I don't think Bradley Beal's a realistic target, Ryan, no, but I do think that the Wall news could impact the Sixers in more of a small-scale term. Maybe a guy like Trevor Ariza becomes available, a guy that obviously would plug really nicely into the Sixers, depth of what they need. I don't know that they have the assets or, if they did have the assets to get Beal at this deadline, it would basically take everything that the Sixers have outside of, probably Ben and Joel and leave them very little to work with going forward. I'm just not sure that that's something the Wizards are going to be able to turn around that quickly, considering this news just broke today. I don't know if they'll be able to, decide that they do want to move Beal in that time. But I do think that it will make some of those other guys, like I said, specifically Ariza, available potentially on Thursday, which adds, just another target for the Sixers to keep an eye on in the next 48 hours.
Yeah, it looks like anything that happens would be mostly in the buyout market unless they can maneuver something on a lower end for a deal. I mean, what currency? I can't imagine Markelle Fultz gets dealt in the next 2 weeks, right, or week.
It's doubtful. I mean, if I had to bet money right now, I would say no, Markelle will be here. He's one of the few pieces. I mean, his value is certainly depressed from, a number one pick a year ago. But there is still some intrigue, in him league. From what I've heard, he obviously has shown some flashes when he's been able to be out there. He's still super young. As people like to say, he was the number one pick for a reason. So I do think there's some interest in him league-wide. The thing is, it would end up being a guy coming back that just wouldn't necessarily wow the fan base for giving up a number one pick. And it's not, a matter of if the Sixers are willing to do that move. But outside of him, I mean, you're looking at Wilson Chandler's expiring contract, their own first and second round picks in the next two drafts, and that Miami pick. Other than that, there's really not a lot for this team to work with to make, legit improvements. So it really might come down to Markelle being a swing piece if they do want to make that move. But if I had to bet, I would say no, he'll still be on the roster past Thursday.
How much do you think the Sixers will rely on Landry Shamet come playoffs?
Again, this is dependent on obviously what they do in the next couple of days. If they, acquire a couple more shooters that would bump Landry down. But I do think that he's definitely earned Brett's trust, more so I think than obviously a lot of us expected, especially obviously on the offensive end. He's really kind of replaced a lot of the production, as much as the national media likes to point out that, the Sixers are missing shooting and they need Bellinelli and Ilyasova back. I feel like Shamet's really kind of replaced a lot of, especially Bellinelli, that outside production that he provided for that team last year. And obviously they'll need those pressure valves, like pressure release guys in the playoffs that can, when Joel's getting double teamed in the post, when they're backing up Ben and he's forced to drive more and create for others, they're going to need those guys just like Marco last year. And I think Landry has kind of carved out, that spot in Brett's mind and in the rotation. So he'll definitely be used. I think it's just a matter of, depending on what moves are made exactly, if he's going to be a guy that they kind of feel comfortable giving 12 minutes with, or that they're kind of forced to rely on a little bit more than they would maybe feel comfortable with and pick a 16, 18-minute per game thing.
Just to remind everyone, because I think at times everyone gets a little bit excited, off track. They hear names out there that potentially could come to the Sixers. You get excited about the Sixers' chances in the Eastern Conference, but you forget about the offseason and what their game plan ideally wants to be then. You forget how young this team is, myself included. Like, what's this organization's game plan as far as this next year? Like, who do they want to trade for? What are they willing to give up? What are their plans in the offseason? Because that dictates a lot of what's going to happen or not going to happen up to the deadline and even in the buyout market.
Yeah, that's really true. And I think as much as, acquiring Jimmy Butler helped that team, it also helped the team. It also brings up a few questions because now, if you bring Jimmy in and you want to re-sign him, he's that third guy now for the foreseeable future. The money's going to be tied up. The team is going to be what it is with Embiid, Simmons, and Butler. If you let him walk, obviously you give up Dario and Rocco. But the way I think the Sixers are approaching everything is I don't think Butler is going to be traded, obviously, if that needs to be said. I do not think they'll trade him before Thursday. I think they really want to go into the postseason with the trio of Butler, Embiid, and Simmons. But, that's why that move was made in the first place, not for the regular season. They know they could win 50-odd games and get into the top 4 seed in the East with, Rocco and Dario in the lineup. The move was made because of what happened in the postseason last year where things broke down. They got beat up and they just didn't have a guy that they could give the ball to create on his own. Jimmy's supposed to be that guy for the team, and I think that they, Elton, the front office, and Brett want to see it in the postseason environment, which is obviously somewhat of a risk, if he walks away. But I think they're really looking at it as they have the two centerpieces. They have Ben Joel. Those two alone, two all-stars in their second and third years respectively, are good enough to carry this franchise going forward. And if Jimmy did walk this season, it's too unfortunate to lose two rotation players. But then they look at it as, okay, well, we have all of this cap space that would have went to Jimmy Butler, so now we could just, allocate elsewhere to help bolster the team around Ben and Joel. So I think there's not one specific direction that they're headed in. Like right now, I think it's really kind of up in the air, and a lot of it will depend on, obviously how the rest of the season shakes out, how Jimmy ends up, feeling about the franchise come the summertime. But I don't think, there's a lot of pessimistic articles, I think, and stuff if you read it, but I don't think the franchise looks at it that way. I think they see that they have their two guys in Ben and Joel, and now it's just about, making the team perfect around them moving forward.
At the Real Mike KB on Twitter, Mike, you got a couple of names on the website of targets, and we'll get into them in just a minute here. But I want to ask you about Markelle Fultz in general. There's no updates, nothing, right? Does anybody know anything about what's going on with this guy? We were supposed to hear 3 to 6 weeks, nothing.
Yeah, it's pretty much radio silence, Mike. I mean, he's obviously been around the team on the road trip. He was there on the bench. He'll be back tonight in Philly when they're, hosting the Raptors. But, we're not allowed to talk to him, obviously, as he's not, an actively playing with the team. So we're not getting any information from him directly. And the team, they've not provided any information since he, rejoined the team from LA and was said to be continuing his rehab. I think last week on the air, I said my best guess would be that if they're looking to bring him back, it would probably be directly after the All-Star break. All-Star games February 17th.
You almost feel like, Michael, it almost feels like they might go down the same road they went last year and bring him back for like 10 to 15 games, see what he gives you, and if it's something that they trust to maybe expand his role come playoff time. But I almost feel like it's going to go down the same road where it's like, hey, we're going to give him like 10 to 15 games, see what he's got, and if it's nothing, then he doesn't play in the playoffs. And if it's something, we find a role for him in the playoffs. But it almost feels like it's going down that road.
It's definitely possible. I think ideally they would like to get him a little bit more time. They went down that road last year, and he looked decent during those 10 games, and then you saw he got some minutes in the playoffs and, was largely unplayable, and TJ ended up getting a lot of those minutes, and it kind of, threw the rotation for a spin. I think ideally, if he's going to be a guy that they're going to give legitimate minutes to in the postseason, I think they'd want to be him to be a little bit more comfortable with, playing more than just 10 games and being back in the rotation. And I think they'd like to see a little bit more from him. But again, this is just speculation because, like you said, it's all up in the air at this point. It certainly is following a similar pattern to last year, so it wouldn't be surprising, if it shook out in a similar manner.
Let's look at some of the names you listed. Miritic's interesting. Would you have to give a first-round pick to get him?
Probably. I think you'd have to give up a first, maybe a couple seconds. I think that's something the Sixers would be willing to do. Obviously their picks are not the same, looked at the same as they were a couple of years ago when they were really trying to build. I think they see themselves as a team that has a chance to get to the finals this year, and they'd be willing to give up a pick or two in order to get a guy like Mirotic, who I think specifically would be a really good fit for what they need.
Yeah, he's a guy that's having his best year. I mean, he's averaging almost 17, 18 points a game, right? He would be in the more Saric type of filling, replacing that role?
Yeah, the Saric, Ilyasova, a better version of Mike Muscala, really a guy that could slide into that stretch four, but also doesn't mind banging low. I mean, he can rebound, but he really can shoot at a high clip, too. He's a guy, Embiid really liked playing alongside Dario and Ilyasova last year. I think it would be a similar fit like that, where he could really kind of give Joel the space to operate, but also mix it up in the paint if he needed to.
You look at where we are right now, and I know that we talk a lot, the four of us, five of us, everybody here, and it seems like the conversations don't generally shift outside of Simmons and Embiid, and, every now and again there's some Butler drama that you have to disprove being up there. But I wonder, what's the real conversation about this team this year when you hit the postseason? And it's not even so much fan expectations, Michael, more so as what the team is really looking at to gain from this year. Is it to make the Eastern Conference Finals? Is it to show that Brett Brown can coach his way out of a second-round matchup? Is it to go in and say we're as good as anybody and we have a shot at really taking Golden State to 5-6 games? You're there, so you kind of have a feel of the goal. And I know everybody's going to tell you, hey, we want to win the championship, but realistically, what would you say that goal is?
That's a great question. I think the goal is honestly just positioning themselves as a team that could be, considered. A lot's going to change, I think, in the NBA this summer. I think a lot of the teams around the league are operating with the idea that, maybe the Warriors aren't going to be the exact same, 4 All-Star Warrior team that we've seen. Other things could shake up. In the micro, I think the successful season for the Sixers would obviously just be getting further than they did last season. I think a conference finals appearance in, Ben's second season, Joel's third season would really, if you want to say send the message that the Sixers are trying to send, I guess, in terms of, they're a team that's here, they're young, but they're already established. in this time period. I think that's, the goal in the short term. Obviously, the long goal is to get these guys experience. The Sixers are very sold, obviously, on this duo of Ben and Joel, at least for the time being. I think the goal is just to get these guys, the experience. The Butler thing's kind of an experiment. They know, Brett has said multiple times that, I think he said last week his exact words were, depth is the holy grail for the Sixers at this point. Like, they know that they're a couple pieces away from being able to contend with these teams, but they also know that they're top of their rosters as good as anyone. So it's really kind of just a balancing act, I guess, for trying to figure out the best, supporting cast for these two guys to really – They want to be a power in the East moving forward. That doesn't necessarily mean getting to the finals every season, but it means being that team that is going to be, in the last 2-3 games and win 50 games annually and give yourself, a shot to be there. And I think this is just the next step. Last year was obviously they got their feet wet, got in the second round, and then this year, it's about continued development, I guess you could say. This is the next step, and then next year would be, even building off of this year.
You mentioned Butler being an experiment, and that's what makes this whole situation, MKB, so tough to read for at least me, because we talk about this team being young. We talk about them last year coming onto the scene essentially out of nowhere, exceeding their expectations. They give away a couple key pieces this year for Butler. So now it's like, is it win now? Is it not win now? They have 3 stars in the East. When you look at the other elite teams, the Sixers will have the next 2 best players at minimum against any other team in the East. Boston, okay, you want to give it to Kyrie. The Sixers have the next two best players. So my point is, like, how is this Butler quote-unquote experiment working in your mind? And how challenging is it for this team as far as the players and the front office to figure out who they are and how long is it going to take to get there, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense, and that's, I think, what this team has been wrestling with since, even before they acquired Jimmy. I think their timeline was obviously accelerated, which you kind of mentioned. I don't think a lot of people expected them to win 52 and get to the second round last year, and since that happened, they kind of jumped from this point where they're, feel okay taking their time to where they're ready to win now with 2 of the best young players in the NBA. And, Jimmy getting in here, it's tough to read. Honestly, it's tough to read how he's been fitting in so far. There's obviously the publicized incidents. There's been, our access to him has been limited. He talks, before and after games, but there's not much that he gets into, and it's hard to read how he's feeling about the situation. But, it kind of circles back to what I was saying before. I think the Sixers are situation now, they're viewing it in kind of a fluid manner. There's no specific, they're not holding themselves to, this has to happen at this time. It's more just kind of getting a feel for how this team is going to continue to grow, which can be frustrating to fans. I understand. I obviously talk to a lot of people that say something similar to what you said is, they have these 3 guys, and in any series, they'd be, the 3 of the 4 best, 5 best players on the floor. But at the same time, it's, their youth is something that has to be considered. And then it's the whole fit. It's going to take more than obviously 2 guys. Most of the time the team loses this season, you notice with the Kings game or, going all the way back. I don't have the exact number, but I would say close to probably 80% of their losses come when they're down a starter, just because when they have to pull someone off the bench and put them into the starting 5, they do not have the depth to really, make up for that. So, I feel like I'm kind of being redundant, which I apologize for, but it's really just...
Come on, man.
Jeez.
It's really just a matter of them, finding those pieces to fit around Ben and Joel, and that's why I said Jimmy thing's kind of an experiment, because that's a huge decision they have to make this summer if they want to invest, 5 years, the max money into this guy.
5/190, man. 5/190. And look,
is he worth it?
I don't think he takes anything less than that. The reason he won out of Minnesota is because everybody else got paid but him.
Yeah, and it's not like he's going to give the Sixers any sort of, discount. He's been here for a few months. He wants that bag. And if, that would probably be the only thing that would keep him in Philly. And at that point, they really have to measure, where do they want him to be paying him that much when he's 34 and there's already, he's great. Don't get me wrong, but I think you can already see he's not necessarily quite as athletic as he was when he was first on the scene with Derrick Rose and the Bulls. I mean, that's just what happens, and they have to really it's going to be a huge decision. I don't have insight into right now what they're thinking other than it's it's open-ended.
He was really good, by the way, in the fourth quarter against the Kings. I mean, he was hitting he was going. He reminded me MKB, do you remember the game? He scored 53 for the Bulls against the Sixers that night. He
Yeah.
couldn't miss in the fourth quarter. Took that game to that was a process Sixer team that was awful. They were up 20 in the fourth quarter, and Butler brings them all the way back. He was unconscious. He reminded me like that in the Kings game for a little bit, and then late in the game, it looked like he ran out of gas a little bit. But they have I think they got a real tough decision to make on what they want to do with him. 5'1", 90. I don't know if he's a 5'1", 90 guy, but what do? You can't just let him go and get nothing.
If you let him go and get nothing, then you're basically back to where you were 2 summers ago with just Ben and Joel and
without Dario and Rocco.
Right. So then you're just you take a step back, certainly, and that's the gamble that they took, by acquiring him. That's why I said, it obviously answered some questions in the short term. It gave them a closer, a perimeter guy, but, it opened up a lot of questions long term that, that can't be answered.
Which almost to Ryan's point, and he's brought this up a couple of times, when you make that trade, it's almost as if, like, we're going for it right now. Maybe our guys aren't ready, but if you make a trade like that, the message is almost like because if you don't get it now and you let him walk, then you almost took 2 steps back.
Mm-hmm.
To an extent, but I think they're viewing it like and it's funny, like, fans are fickle. That if they had done nothing and stayed pat with the team that they had last year and that team lost in the second round, people would be, calling for Elton Brand, calling for Brett Brown, saying they didn't do anything. They shook it up. They're taking a chance. Maybe this ends up working and they get to the conference finals or the finals this year. Everything's clicking. They give Jimmy the money, and it works out, and they're happily ever after. If not, I think they're kind of looking at it like their losses. Yeah, they lost. One guy in Rocco that's very valuable, and I'm a big Dario fan. He's basically out of the rotation in Minnesota. Not that he's not great, but there's holes in his game. I don't think losing him is something that, from a basketball perspective, the team misses. They all loved him. Brett loved him. He's a great guy. On the floor, I don't know how much they really miss him. Rocco's a guy that's missed. But like I said, they're just looking at it. They have Ben and Joel and a ton of cap space, and I feel like they could be in a lot worse situation than that. And again, it's tough. That's not an ideal situation, but I think that's kind of how they're viewing it at this point.
Wes Matthews, Dedmon, which guy intrigues you the most? And the Wes Matthews, that's interesting because, a lot of people think buyout. I would think there's going to be people lining up to buy him on the buyout market. So do you got to just trump the buyout market and go to the front of the line and make a deal because you don't want to be negotiating up against others?
I mean, it's tough. It depends, what they would want. Also, he has a pretty hefty, salary to take on. I don't know if the Sixers interested in taking that on if it's not on the buyout market. I think he would have some interest in coming to the Sixers in terms of role. At least there would be, a lot of minutes for him here if he were to sign, and a pretty large role on a team that could go deep in the playoffs. So, that could be appealing. I think, best case scenario on a small scale would be if they were able to add him through the buyout and trade for Mirotic, from the Pelicans on Thursday. With the current lineup they have, I think that would give the team, a huge boost of depth that could get them to compete with, pretty much anybody in the East.
Nice stretch coming up tonight, Friday, Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday to the All-Star break. This 12-game stretch where they played a bunch of teams so far has been pretty good. I mean, we'll see. I think the home games are the more important ones, though. Getting these home games, I think, will prove more than winning, even winning a game at Golden State. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. They have to continue to take care of home court, which they have. They've obviously been a great home team, but I would definitely agree that they have to take care of the games in Philly because they certainly, I think the Pacers will drop out, but obviously the Sixers want to stay within that top 3-4 spot in the East, and to do so, they got to take care of those games.
Boston's playing, and Boston's starting to play. They moved up from 5 to they're in the 3 spot now, right?
Yeah, they're over us right now. So, I mean, it's going to be a battle, and they got to, the Sixers obviously want that home court advantage, so they need to continue to obviously take care of business.
All right, Michael Kaskey-Blomain here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Are you going to the game tonight? You'll be there, right?
Yeah, I'll be down there.
All right, man. We'll talk to you.
All right, man.